Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So what the hell is going on with the Indiana Fever? Seriously, what is actually happening behind the scenes right now? And before anybody jumps into the comments, let me be very clear. This is not me saying the Indiana Fever are a terrible basketball team. That's not me saying they're the worst team in the league. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about something much bigger than wins and losses. I'm talking about everything happening around the organization. Because when you look at the last few weeks, none of this feels normal. The biggest thing that has people talking is obviously the Scott Agness situation. Now, let's just use common sense for a second. If what Scott Agness said was truly so damaging, so outrageous, and so unacceptable that it justified essentially removing him from the picture, why did it take so long? Think about it. If an organization genuinely believes somebody crossed a major line, they don't wait around for weeks. They don't let the story continue. They don't allow discussions to build. They act immediately. That's why the timeline is what makes so many people suspicious, because from the outside looking in, it feels like something else is going on, and that's where all the speculation starts. Now, when it comes to Caitlin Clark and her injury situation, I actually think there are two different conversations happening at the same time. The first conversation is basketball. The second conversation is public relations. From a basketball perspective, Caitlin Clark herself has basically said her body wasn't feeling right. She has talked about the fact that it's a long season. She has talked about being smart. She has talked about making sure she's healthy for the future. Honestly, that's completely reasonable. The Indiana Fever have invested everything into Caitlin Clark. You don't want to sacrifice September just to force a few extra minutes in May or June. Any smart organization would think long-term. Any smart coaching staff would think long-term. So if the Fever are managing Caitlin Clark's workload carefully, that's not necessarily a problem. The problem is the messaging. The problem is how everything is being communicated. Because every time Stephanie White talks, every time the organization releases a statement, every time a report comes out, it feels like there are more questions than answers, and fans have noticed it. That's why so many people keep asking the same thing. Why isn't anybody challenging Stephanie White during press conferences? Why isn't anybody asking tougher questions? Why isn't anybody pushing back when Caitlin Clark gets subbed out despite being one of the hottest players on the floor? These are questions fans are asking every single day. Now, whether those criticisms are fair or not is another discussion, but the fact remains that people are asking them, and some people believe the answer is simple. They believe that pushing too hard could create problems for certain media members. Again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's what many fans believe, and perception matters. That's the issue. The Indiana Fever are now dealing with a perception problem, because when people start feeling like information is being controlled, they immediately become suspicious of everything. Every statement is analyzed, every quote is analyzed, every roster move is analyzed, every substitution is analyzed. Everything becomes a controversy, and that's exactly where the Indiana Fever seem to be right now. Now, let's talk about Caitlin Clark specifically, because whether people like it or not, Caitlin Clark changed everything. She changed everything for the Indiana Fever. She changed everything for the WNBA. The amount of attention she brought to the league is unprecedented. The amount of money she generated is unprecedented. The amount of media coverage she generated is unprecedented. And while all of that sounds great, it also creates pressure. A lot of pressure, because suddenly every decision becomes national news. Every injury update becomes national news. Every coaching decision becomes national news. Every disagreement becomes national news. That's not something organizations are used to handling. And honestly, I think the Indiana Fever were completely unprepared for it. They were prepared to have Caitlin Clark. I don't think they were prepared for everything that came with Caitlin Clark. There's a huge difference, because now you're not just managing a basketball team, you're managing one of the biggest sports stories in America, and that's difficult. really difficult. This is why the Skip Bayless situation was so fascinating. Skip Bayless falls for a troll account, a completely ridiculous situation, and yet, somehow, it turns into another Indiana Fever controversy. How does that even happen? How does a troll tweet become a major discussion involving the Fever? The answer is simple, because every story involving Caitlin Clark now becomes a headline. Every story becomes content. Every debate becomes content. And it feels like the Indiana Fever still haven't figured out how to handle that reality. That's why so many fans believe the organization looks overwhelmed. Not because they're losing basketball games, because they look like they're constantly reacting instead of leading. They're constantly putting out fires instead of controlling the situation. And that's where things start becoming concerning, because this is the first real adversity the organization has faced since Caitlin Clark arrived. During her rookie year, expectations were lower. People were excited. People were optimistic. The future looked bright. Now, expectations are different. Now, people expect results. Now, people expect competence. And when those expectations aren't met, criticism follows. That's sports. That's reality. Look at what happened with the Chicago Sky and Angel Reese. The attention became enormous. The pressure became enormous. Everything became magnified. Again, I'm not saying the Indiana Fever are going to make dramatic moves. I'm not saying they're considering anything extreme. But I would be shocked if people in the organization haven't privately asked difficult questions. Questions like, are we handling this correctly? Are we communicating effectively? Are Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White the perfect fit together? What happens if things continue going sideways? Those are reasonable questions. Any front office would ask them. Any ownership group would ask them. And right now, it feels like the Fever are searching for answers. The biggest concern for me is that the organization appears to be fighting multiple battles at once. They're trying to win games, they're trying to manage injuries, they're trying to manage expectations, they're trying to manage media narratives, they're trying to manage fan reactions. That's a lot. And when organizations start feeling pressure from every direction, mistakes happen. That's why the Scott Agness situation continues to generate discussion, because many people simply don't understand why it escalated to the level it did. Again, maybe Scott Agness worded something poorly. Maybe the organization felt the comments were inaccurate. Maybe there were conversations behind the scenes that none of us know about. That's entirely possible. But from a public perspective, it looked like a situation that could have been handled with a clarification. Instead, it became another controversy. And that's why people keep talking about it, because every time something happens involving the Indiana Fever, it feels like the response creates even more questions. Now let's look ahead, because ultimately, all of this can change very quickly. Sports are funny that way. You can spend an entire week discussing drama. You can spend an entire week discussing controversies. You can spend an entire week discussing organizational problems. And then one big win changes everything. That's why the Atlanta Dream game is so important. If the Indiana Fever come out and beat the Atlanta Dream, the conversation immediately changes. People start talking about basketball again. People start talking about progress. People start talking about optimism. But if they lose badly, if they get blown out, if the same issues keep showing up, then the pressure gets even bigger. Then every question becomes louder. Then every criticism becomes stronger. At that point, the Fever have some major decisions to make. Do they make roster changes? Do they completely reshape the team around Caitlin Clark? Do they approach the situation the way the 2018 Cleveland Cavaliers approached things and aggressively overhauled the roster? Do they double down on Stephanie White? Do they stay patient? Do they change direction entirely? Those are massive questions, and nobody outside the organization knows the answers. What I do know is this. The Indiana Fever don't look like an organization that's comfortable right now. They look like an organization under pressure. Maybe that pressure is justified. Maybe it isn't. But it's clearly there. And when pressure starts building, people make decisions they normally wouldn't. That's why every move is being scrutinized. That's why every statement is being analyzed. That's why every controversy becomes a major story. Because people sense that something isn't quite right. maybe we're all reading too much into it. Maybe 6 months from now, we'll look back and laugh at all of this. That's possible. But right now, from the outside looking in, it feels like an organization trying to find its footing in the middle of the storm. We'll see what happens next, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Indiana Fever are being unfairly criticized? Do you think there's something bigger happening behind the scenes? And what do you make of the Scott Agness situation? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.